episode of PJ in PJs. My name is Pastor Jared, and we are walking through First Peter. And we are in chapter 1, and we're going to start here in verse 6. I have verse 5 pulled up just for a little bit of an explanation here in just a second. First Peter chapter 1, verse 6. I'm reading from the New King James Version. And then over on the right side, we have the New Revised Standard Version. It says, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold, that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to the praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ." At the very beginning here, we have this word, in. It seems like an insignificant word, but actually, as it turns out, it's very important in our text because it sets the boundaries of these verses that are following in verse 6 and verse 7. Now, when it says "in this," there are two questions that we have to answer. The first is, what does the "this" refer to? That's a pointing pronoun. We call it a demonstrative pronoun. Essentially, it's just referring back to something else. There's a previous reference that we're trying to get a hold of here. And the question is, what is the reference that it is referring to? The second is, how do we take or how do we understand this beginning preposition "in"? Now, the way that we could understand this is that Peter is actually starting a completely new set of ideas. And that's how it's translated here in the New King James, and even over here in the NRSV. It's just translated "in this," saying that there's not really a particular referent. And the reason for that, it just happens to be the form of this particular word here. In fact, if we just pull that up very quickly, down here at the bottom, of course, we have our Greek Strong's number, 3739. And you can see that it occurs many times, these pronouns, as you would expect, 2,814 times for this particular word. And that's not surprising at all. But notice that it can actually be understood in three different, or at least it has different forms. These are called cases. And the case that we have here is a neuter case. So right here, the neuter case, which means that if it's going to be pointing back to something in Greek, that it's got to agree with that particular word. It also has to be neuter. Of course, there are exceptions to this, as there are exceptions in English and so on and so forth. So what is it referring back to? Well, if we go ahead and take a look at verse 5 and just read that here for you, "who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time." Well, this could be referring, if it's referring to anything at all, it could be referring to this entire clause, starting with "who." So this would be a reference to all of the benefits, or the I guess what you're looking forward to of salvation. It could also be referring specifically just to salvation itself, or it could be referring to time. Of course, this word "time" here is being modified by the word "last," so it tells us what kind of time. Well, it's the last time. So we know and understand that to be future. Now, lots of commentators have a problem with referring back to time. As dispensationalists, we don't have an issue with that at all. We see that even though it is a future element, we still presently rejoice in that. We see that those are the things, future promises of God. Those are the things that keep us joyful in the midst of trials. Now, how about this? So, if this is referring to the last time, which I think it is, even though this very rich passage here with many different idiosyncratic types of syntactical things is going on, and even though it has lots of modifiers, lots of adjectives, it's very rich, it's really hard for us to say that it hangs all on this one word. That doesn't happen very often, and that's pretty unique. So that is one thing that is a problem there, unless we understand time, the last time, to be synonymous with everything that's being spoken of in previous, which I think is possible for sure. All right, so how do we understand it? If this is not starting a new clause, which I don't think it is, I think that it's building in this kind of cascading, unfolding explanation of the eulogizing of God. This would mean, if it's starting something, not starting something brand new, but this would actually mean because. This is a cause, or the basis of rejoicing. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this up here so that we can make a few notes. So right here we have the basis, or the cause, for rejoicing. It is because of the fact that we are looking forward to what's going to be revealed in the last time that we do rejoice. And we don't just rejoice in a nominal type of way, but we actually rejoice greatly. This is like insurmountable joy. This is like the par excellence of joy. We are so ecstatic about the revelation in the future, in the time to come, that we greatly rejoice over it. And we don't just rejoice in the past or at specific points, but we rejoice continuously. This would be a continuous action here. So we presently rejoice and we continue to rejoice. Now, there are some really interesting paradoxes that we will see here in this text. The first one is dealing with this word rejoice. So presently we rejoice, and then he says, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials. That seems to be a contradiction. Of course, a paradox, technically speaking, in literary terms, is meant to bring out something that looks like it's purposeful. It looks as though it doesn't agree. But the reason that it does this is for literary effect. So we're talking about continuously rejoicing. And then we have to contemplate how it is that through various trials we're grieved and yet we continually rejoice. Well, every Christian knows this is just the story of being a Christian. This is just what Christianity is. That through trials in life, although they're very difficult, even though we weep in these trials, we still have this precious hope of the future that gives us continuous joy. And joy, of course, as Pastor Dan explained last Sunday, joy is different than happiness. Happiness is just the feeling that you have. Joy is the expression of thankfulness to God. It is an expression of anticipated joy. And this is a real thing. You think about Christians gathering every Sunday who have all these burdens that we bear, all of these trials that we bring with us to church every Sunday. And we're looking for this relief. And sometimes we don't find it. Instead, what we find is a tension every Sunday morning. And that tension is the tension between what we feel in that moment and yet who we know God is on any given day. That we know what he's doing. And since we know what he's doing and we know who he is, we worship him. You see, the worship itself is the expression of that thankfulness because of the future promises of God and even the past actions of God in our lives. And so we can rejoice through worship. And I think that's really the idea here. It's not just a joy that is isolated from our Christian experience, but it's actually a joy that is expressed through our Christian actions, specifically through worship and service and prayer. All right, it says here, though now for a little while, we're going to kind of bracket that in. So now for a little while, what this tells us is that we got two interesting things going on here. Now, which is present, and then a little while here. Those two don't seem to match up very well. The now and the little while, because there are two things going on here in the text. First off, the first thing is that because it says though now and we're presently rejoicing, those two adverbs are actually this and this. They're actually modifying this word rejoice, which is present continuous. And since it's present continuous, this means that it's not just like these things have entered in all of a sudden, these trials, but actually these have been happening from the very beginning, and that they continue to happen. But the contradiction, or the paradox, as we see this next paradox, is that this has a definite end. A little while means that this has an end to it. This isn't going to continue on forever and ever and ever and ever, these trials. So even though they're going on right now and we're going to have to deal with them, it's only a little while. And that seems to be a contradiction of just our being and our existence as Christians, as people, just as human beings, we'll say. Not even necessarily specifically related to Christianity. But as human beings, if you have to deal with a trial your entire life, you wouldn't say that's a little while. We think of the trials that Job endured, how those were very quick in succession. And we don't really know how much time passed between the passing of his family and the destruction of all of that he owned and his wealth and his health and the conversations that he had with his three friends. But we do know that there was an end during his life, and God blessed him later on. So we wouldn't say that, he suffered his entire life. You'd say that he suffered a little while. But when it's used here, a little while really means your entire life. How can it be just a little while if it's your entire life that we have to endure suffering? Well, the answer is that there is a very, very Judeo-Christian perspective here about eternity. That this is in light of eternity. As James says, that our life is like a vapor. It's here for a little while and then it passes away. And the Bible compares many things to the Word of God. Things pass away, but the Word of God, it endures forever. So right away, Peter is bringing out this dualism of existence. And the dualism of existence is that there is an eternal presence of God, and there's an eternal existence of God that spans from eternity past all the way to eternity future. It's indefinable, it's unexplainable, it's unquantifiable. We can't wrap our hands around it. And then on the other hand, there is our human existence, which is passing away, which is frail. And since we pass away so quickly in light of eternity, a little while is our lives, but eternity, of course, with the eternal promises of God. Just for a little while, we have to deal with this, but in eternity, we'll no longer have to worry about those things. The trials will pass away. The tears will be wiped from our eyes. All distress will be removed. There will no longer be any sickness. There will no longer be any type of distress. Now we come to our next part here. If need be. Now this is a first class condition. All that means is that it's combined with a specific type of verb, and there are different verbs that it can be combined with to create a first class condition. In this instance, we are going to take it as a given. So all that to say that it doesn't necessarily always mean since, but in this case it does, because it makes sense in the text. So since it is necessary, and that's really the idea behind this verb need be. Since it is necessary, think about this. We suffer our entire lives, and it's because it's necessary. It is necessary that we have been grieved by various trials. That would be that it happens in the past and it continues to have the present consequences here. You have been grieved by various trials, and we'll go ahead and bracket this as well, by various trials here. This shows us that our trials have a divine purpose. God actually plans these trials out in our life. It is necessary. That's the idea behind this word. It is absolutely necessary. They're divinely planned trials. These aren't accidents, the trials that come into our lives. These don't happen as a haphazard way. God is not this malevolent God like Zeus, who just simply does things for his own pure entertainment. God doesn't do this for entertainment. In fact, in our next verse here, verse 7, it starts with that, and we can actually say that as so that, which is the desired result that God has. So there is a desired result that God has through all these trials. You have been grieved by various trials. Instrumental use of this word by. instrumental just simply means like that's how God is going to accomplish it. And notice here that just like James, we have this word here, various, by various trials. That means all kinds of different trials, manifold trials. Not every Christian is going to go through the same trials because God is using specific trials to mold you into a specific type of person. He wants you to be a specific type of tool in his hands to accomplish a work. If everybody was a weightlifter when it came to their faith, for instance, then not everybody could run a marathon. But some people need to be the weightlifter. Some people need to train for the marathon. Everybody has different kinds of trials, and there's all kinds of trials that God uses that grieve us, yes, that grieve us, but it's only for a short time, has an end, it has a divine purpose. And through the trials, we greatly rejoice. You can't forget that. We greatly rejoice because we know that there is something at the end. There's something at the end of all of this that God has for us. Okay, moving on to verse 7. So that, we're going to translate it so that, and that's the desired result, the genuineness of your faith being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So the whole reason that God brings these trials into our lives, the whole purpose behind that, is to bring out the genuineness of your faith. Now, we need to take a close look at this here, the genuineness of your faith, because most translations translate this, the idea of genuineness, as being the product of the metallurgical process, and they translate it as genuineness. If we just look at the word itself, dakimion is the metallurgical word that means the testing of a type of metal in order to remove the dross. The idea is the purification process. And so here, because it is actually a subject, it's the subject of this entire long and rich passage. So if you understand it instead as the product or the resulting product of the metallurgical process of your faith, and the way that this was called a genitive here, we have two genitives here. First is faith, and the second is your. Genitive is just a syntactical label for a word. In this case, it's actually a case that modifies another word. We usually translate it in English as of, but this could have so many different meanings, this genitive. In this case, the product of this process is your faith. Or we can say, namely what I mean by product is your faith. Like I've said before, faith is not a pill that you swallow. Faith is actually a muscle that you exercise. When you exercise your faith, you actually become stronger in your faith. But if you don't exercise your faith, you become weak in your faith and your ability to be able to go through trials. The desired purpose of these trials, it's to produce faith. This relationship we would call a subjective genitive, which means that faith is being turned into kind of a verb. It's not an actual verb, but it takes on the kind of the connotation of a verb, so that the product, namely your exercise of faith. In other words, these trials, they're there to give you the room, the opportunity to exercise your faith. That is what the purpose of these trials, the purpose of the trials are, is so that you will exercise your faith. It's to give you room for that. So if you as a Christian, as we as Christians are going through trials and we choose to give up, we choose not to exercise our faith, we are wasting God's plan for our lives. We're literally throwing it out the window and we become weaker in our faith. So we just got past the genuineness of faith being much more precious than gold that perishes. Okay, so we're running into yet another paradox here. The product, the desired product of God of your life is that you will exercise your faith. And the exercising of that faith is far more precious. This is what creates this paradox. It's gold that perishes. The word right down here, as you can see, is apolumi. Apolumi is destroy, completely, utterly destroy. You can see that right down here. Okay, and then it gives you a few verses to take a look at if you're interested in that. I'll leave that up so that you can kind of look at those different verses to see where how that word is used. Passing away, right? It's something that can't last. And of course, we're kind of building a a theme, right? A meta theme or an underlying theme, pardon me. It's not a meta theme, but an underlying theme throughout this passage. He just mentioned that God has given us something that's reserved and guarded in heaven that is imperishable, that cannot be destroyed. Remember how at the beginning I said that Peter is bringing out this sort of dualistic existential parallel of our existence. You get the eternal part aspect, that's God's perspective, that's where God dwells, eternity, and then there's our perspective, our lives, which are short and perishable. This is just running with that theme again, that we have this thing in heaven that's far more precious than gold that perishes. And the reason that it is looked at, because we're thinking in terms of sanctification right here, that God works a little bit at a time in our lives to create the type of person he wants us to be in this life. The reality is he actually has a grander goal than that, and that is to transform us completely inside out, physically, spiritually, 100% sinless, into glorified creatures in heaven. And so that's really what he's working towards. So there's kind of this present aspect that God is working in us, but he's working toward that. Of course, we won't actually reach that until we see Jesus face to face. But you can see how this is far more precious, what God's work in our lives presently, but also the salvation that he has guarded in heaven for us is also far more precious than gold. I kind of wrestled with this for just a little bit because not a single commentary actually talked about this idea of gold that perishes. This is a paradox because gold is, as far as we know, is one of the most enduring metals that exists. It's a precious metal, doesn't rust. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And that's why it's such a desirable metal when it comes to, wedding rings and things like that, because it's going to last. So why is it that Peter says here that gold perishes? How is it that gold actually perishes here? He's not talking about like gold passing out of existence. He's not talking about completely, utterly destroying it. Instead, it's gold that really doesn't have lasting value. That's really the idea when we look at this dualistic existential existence that we have of eternity and present. When the two converge and we enter into heaven, the street will be made of gold. It just passes away. And so it's really not that important in the scheme of things. Gold's value is going to pass away. And that is really what I think the meaning behind here. And it's a paradoxical because gold is supposed to always retain its value. In this case, it does not. In comparison with what God has for us in eternity, what he's doing in our lives even presently. So much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire. So we have these two words here, perishes and tested, and these are both participles. And both of these participles are being used kind of like as adjectives in a way. It's very strange. You don't even have it here in the text. But there is actually an article, just a definite article, the, and it actually modifies both this participle here and this participle. It modifies them both, which is very unique. It's very strange. And it's interesting because Peter does this quite a few times when he writes. And so we would say because it's stylistically his, I'll show you where it is right here. So that, here it is, the Dokimeon, that's a product of your faith, being far more precious than gold. And here it is. Here's this article here that's kind of like it's kind of like our the. So there's that article. It actually modifies both of these words here, which is just very strange, but you can see it there in the Greek text. Very interesting. And then it's through fire being tested, okay? And dokimazo, that's the same word as dokimeon. So our genuineness of our faith, it's being tested. Gold is also being tested, and it doesn't perish, even though it's tested and it comes out pure. Even the purest of gold is the idea. The gold that has all that dross removed. Even that gold that exists, and this is done, of course, through fire, and we see that there is a parallel here of how our trials are fiery trials, and that is the means or the instrument by which God brings about the product. And same here, that through this fire, it brings out this product, and this product is this purified gold. that this, even though it's a purified gold, it is not as precious as what God is doing in our lives. Here's the main verb. You see a little splat there. You'll even recognize this word once I say it. So there's that main verb, may be found, and you're probably familiar with the term eureka. I found it. So that's that word there. And it may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Just to kind of connect all the dots again, it is because of our hope of the last time, what God's going to do in the lowest time, that we greatly rejoice, and we continuously rejoice. Even though in this life it's only going to be for a little while, and we know that it has an end, but it is necessary that we are grieved by various trials, all kinds of different trials, and God's going to use those to do works in our lives to make us the type of person He wants us to be. In order that's the desired product, it might produce the work of our faith, so our faith being exercised, and that exercising of our faith, that is far more precious than gold that perishes, it passes away as far as its value, even though it could be purified by fire. That's the idea, even though it's tested by fire, and that's a parallel to our tests and trials, of course, but the tests and trials of the metallurgical process aren't nearly as valuable as the tests and trials that we go through in order to produce us as pure before the Lord. And though it was tested by fire, may be found. Okay, so, and this is where it is, that the genuineness of your faith may be found. You see this whole part here, this whole clause here, all that is doing is giving us more information from here to here. There's a kind of a parenthetical clause here, but the main story is happening right here. So we have this subject clause here, genuineness of your faith may be found to praise. So may be found, that is, that it may be revealed. So when you are like digging through something and you discover what's underneath, you would say that you found the thing that you're looking for. And that's kind of the idea of what's underneath all of this, is that we see that there is a purpose. And here's another purpose clause here, to the praise, honor, and glory. So the whole purpose of all of this, of all of these trials, it's not just for us. Christianity is not so self-centered as that, to say that it's all about us. Instead, it is to the praise, the honor, and the glory of God is the idea. So when we are revealed, and he comes full circle here from last time to at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And, eschatologically speaking, the last time, this could be referring to the second coming of Christ. It could be referring to maybe the judgment seat of Christ, the Bema seat of Christ. But it could be eschatologically further than that in the future. As dispensationalists, we're probably going to say that this last time here, it really is referring to when we see Jesus face to face at the rapture. Then we will be transformed in a twinkling of an eye, as Paul says. So this last time here is also parallel with at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And this revelation of Jesus Christ, not talking about the second coming, but because we're referring to the church here, the church age, I think that this is actually referring to the rapture. So when Jesus is revealed to us, when we see Jesus face to face, either way, it's talking about transformation, right? It's talking about when we will be transformed, we will see him, we will be changed. And when we are changed and we are who God intended us to be from the very beginning, that is going to result in praise, honor, and glory of God. And then it's that's this word right here, en, which typically you would never translate this as at. It's a temporal use of this preposition, but we would probably say, I think the NRSV has when. At is more like spatial, when is more temporal. I would prefer probably when over at. It's not a big deal at all, but it's when Jesus is revealed. And again, these genitives, the revelation of Jesus, right? Revelation of Jesus. Here we have our genitive, tip-off, of, and this is another subjective genitive, which just means that Jesus acts as a subject, as though the word revelation has a verbal aspect. When Jesus, who is the Christ, is revealed. On that day, God will receive all the glory. It's not just for us, it's for him. Keep that in mind. And that concludes today's walk through 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. Hope that you are blessed and that you have a blessed day. Thank you so much for listening in. And if you could, right there on our YouTube channel, if you could like and subscribe to our page. We're trying to hit 100 subscribers, and we would really appreciate if you want to share this video with friends who may be interested, people who just want to walk through a book like this. Go ahead and share it, and then ask them to subscribe to our page. That would help us out tremendously. God bless you, and may the Lord keep you, and may you always rejoice in him, as though, even though for a little while we're going through trials that we're going through right now. May the Lord give you great joy as we await the revelation of Jesus Christ.